Hello again. I'm sure that we all know by now that the British Empire is generally regarded in Britain as a wicked enterprise founded upon the transatlantic slave trade. It's claimed that much of the prosperity of this mighty empire was gained from the wealth generated by the trade in African slaves. At the same time, though, we are invited to recognise and indeed celebrate the fact that there were kingdoms and empires in sub-Saharan Africa before the arrival of white Europeans. This really is the most frightful hypocrisy and cant imaginable, for those African empires themselves had only risen and become wealthy through the export of black slaves. I dare say that we have all heard about the Kingdom of Mali in West Africa. It's claimed as an indigenous black empire. There's a good deal of exaggeration and hype circulating about Mali, whose most famous ruler was, of course, Mansa Musa, very popular in black circles. What nobody ever seems to wish to talk about, though, is the fact that the growth of this empire, like that of the later British Empire, was inextricably bound up with the slave trade, which is to say the export of black African slaves. How do we know this? Well, there were eyewitnesses. In 1351, a Berber scholar and explorer from Tangier set off across the Sahara from the Mediterranean coast of Morocco. Ibn Batoutah had already travelled extensively in Asia and the Middle East, and even China apparently. Now he wished to see what lay south of his own homeland in the largely uncharted country that lay with West Africa at that time. After crossing the Sahara in a camel caravan, Ibn Batoutah arrived at Terraza. This is now in the north of the modern-day country of Mali. Slabs of rock salt were mined here at the time that Ibn Batoutah visited the town, and all the heavy work was undertaken by slaves from the Masufa tribe. After spending some time in Terraza, the caravan moved south again, eventually reaching the capital of the Empire of Mali, which lay at that time on the banks of the river Niger. This was a Muslim realm ruled by a black African sultan. Slaves were so common that Ibn Batoutah was even given one as a present, as a kind of tip. Someone just gave him a slave. After looking at other districts of West Africa, Ibn Batoutah returned to Morocco, travelling with a caravan which was transporting 600 female slaves north across the Sahara. In the description to this video, I give references for those interested in checking up on all this. Let's have a look at another African empire which is often mentioned, that of Aksum. At its height between, say, 200 BC and about 600 AD, the kingdom of Aksum straddled the Red Sea, covering the whole of what is now the independent country of Eritrea, large parts of Ethiopia, and all this Sudan and a big part of Yemen in the Arabian Peninsula. This kingdom is famous for the tall stone monuments found there, which are often cited as an instance of advanced African culture in ancient times. It actually owes more to Semitic civilization, but we won't go into that now. I've covered this before. How did Aksum become so rich and powerful? Because it was a crossroad for the slave trade. Slaves from Central Africa were captured and then exported to the Arabian Peninsula, and that was one of the greatest exports of Aksum. This is only a short video, but I fancy a quite important one. I cannot offhand think of any imperial power, from Rome to Carthage, Mali to Persia, Aksum to Britain, Egypt to France, which was not mixed up to a greater or lesser degree with the slave trade. Unless you believe that Africans are somehow inherently morally or ethically superior to white people from Europe, then it should come as no surprise to learn that their own empires were no exception to this general rule. I'm damned if I'm going to sit here in sackcloth and ashes denouncing the British Empire for doing something that every other culture of every skin colour, from black to brown and white and yellow, has had a hand in. Maybe those talking now about reparations for slavery would care to apply to Ethiopia, Eritrea or Mali and see how far they get in guilt-tripping those nations. Do get a grip, Britain.